Hi, and welcome to today's webinar. This is a Washington, D.C. update on public policy and on COVID developments. This webinar is produced by the National Tooling and Machining Association and the Precision Metal Forming Association. The folks who are delivering this webinar, I'm Caitlin Sickles with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. Also on today's webinar, you'll hear from Paul Nathanson, my colleague here at Bracewell. You'll hear from Omar Nashashibi and John Guzik at the Franklin Partnership. The Franklin Partnership is the on-the-ground lobbying team advocating for small and medium-sized manufacturers, NTMA and PMA members here in Washington, D.C. Paul and I do the strategic communication, so we amplify that work on government relations and communications in traditional media and on social media to make sure that the stories of manufacturers are heard and the impacts of policy on manufacturers are well known. So today's webinar, for folks who may be joining, who don't typically tune into these webinars, we've been doing these now a couple of years, which is stunning, on policy and on COVID. You may have just heard Paul say, yeah, because we are in the same room, which is a real change of pace for folks who are regular listeners and know that we've joined from home and then the office, and now we are in the same room. So it's very exciting. Today's webinar is going to cover a wide range of topics. We're going to talk about federal agency action on COVID. We'll talk about regulatory updates. You can see we're going to talk about EEOC and OSHA. We'll talk a little bit about trade and tariffs, supply chain. We'll talk a little about media, some highlights from the Robotics League competition and other things. So there's lots to cover today. I believe we are going to start with John over at the Franklin Partnership. John, I'm turning to you on federal agency COVID actions, so take it away.
Well, thanks, Caitlin, and welcome everybody. It's been a while. I missed the last webinar because of travel plans, so glad to be back. You know, we started these webinars during when the COVID first, when the country started shutting down, and CDC has played an incredibly important role in helping guide the federal government policies. Now the CDC is looking at the long-term effects of COVID and COVID recovery. And the CDC is saying, you know, even if you have COVID, depending on your health condition, your risk of getting COVID and recovery, it could take weeks, months, and even years. And so the CDC is starting to look at, you know, post-COVID recovery. There's no test out there that's even available for post-COVID conditions. But as I said, the CDC is continuing to look at it. You know, over the course of the COVID discovery, the CDC has put together these little animated cartoon characters. We can flip to the next slide. And this one shows, you know, 1 out of 5 adults over 18 who have had COVID typically are susceptible to many other different ailments. And, you know, this little cartoon character explains what some of these various ailments are for those people who are at risk and who have come down with COVID.
The reason we have this here for you all is from an HR standpoint. If you are starting to increasingly start hearing or seeing complaints from individual employees with regards to certain symptoms that might be covered, and that's something that you need to start factoring in if you have already know that you have a couple of employees that have long COVID, and what kind of conditions and accommodations you might need to be helping them out with over the course of however long that's going to be with them. So that's just from an employer, from a OSHA, from a Department of Labor standpoint. As John mentioned, this is from the CDC, but our context is thinking of it, how this might impact from the human resources standpoint in employment. John, there's another area that we were talking about, and I'll jump on this one quickly, and I'll give you hearing loss in a second. On the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Department of Justice, this is also going back to the human resources, the HR side. Many of you, I mean, if you're not using artificial intelligence as part of the screening for job applicants, right now, you might be using a third-party source that is. There's an investigation into whether those artificial intelligence, the AI, the algorithms, the software being used to screen the first batch of applicants is discriminatory or is not capturing the people that it could and potentially causing issues. So keep that in mind, and that's going to be something we're going to increasingly watch out there as well. John, over in a certain region where we have the OSHA is getting really active again.
Yeah, there are national emphasis plans, and OSHA has recognized a regional emphasis plan. This affects Colorado, Montana, North and South Dakota, and this is regarding hearing and the impact of hearing loss in the workplace. And while it's a regional emphasis plan in just those particular states, we do expect it to be moving to other parts of the country. Essentially, it's a guidance to employers to provide their proper prevention, to protect your hearing. And into this regional emphasis, they identified some of these NAICS codes, and the one shown on the slide here indicates a critical NAICS code to NTMA and PMA members. OSHA is saying job loss, hearing loss leads to job loss. And 18 million employees, could be impacted by hearing loss. And so this is just the beginning of something that we're gonna see across the country spread, sort of like we are starting to see on the heat rule, Omar.
Yeah, that's exactly right, John. As you've heard from us a couple of times, the last presentation in April, we focused more on the National Emphasis Program. John just again explained what the difference is, the regional on hearing. National emphasis is like it sounds. It's an emphasis program where the federal OSHA office is directing its locals, its regionals, its inspectors to put an emphasis on heat. That is already in effect. What this slide is representing is the full proposed rule that the agency is starting to discuss, and you can start seeing the timeline. We testified at the hearing on May 3rd, where that was about 6 hours long, and there's a follow-up comment period as well. OSHA is very quickly continuing to move forward with regards to the heat rule, so we do expect something to come out soon. What they kept repeating is that 70% of heat illnesses occur within the first week of work. They're also discussing how you can further weather acclimatization for employees, including saying maybe the first day on the job only have them work 20% of their normal shift, and then increase it gradually so they can start to get more adjusted to it. And so that's the timeline, as you can see, where they've got an additional follow coming up here in October. And the regions, back to John's point on OSHA, is reminding the regions on heat illness. In the last few weeks, they've issued a couple of notices to the regions around the country. You can see for the Northeast and for the Southwest, reminders about the heat index and coming up and what they're going to do. So keep in mind that this is going to be the first summer where you're going to see both indoor and outdoor emphasis on the heat issue when a heat index reaches 80 degrees or higher, and that's going to be the threshold or when National Weather Service declares a heat emergency. But John, when you get a heat illness or an injury, it's going to also be recordable, and we have a quick update there.
Yeah, and one thing on this hearing that Omar participated in and testified at, I was amazed at how many fringe organizations that I've never heard of were testifying in support of this heat rule. And so, when we first heard about it, it was like, oh, come on, they can't be doing this. They can't be serious. Yes, they are serious. And it's not only it's to protect the employees, but it's also a way for OSHA and the federal government to monitor injury and illness. And so, for example, OSHA has extended the comment deadline for Forms 300 and 301 till June. This is just another attempt to have the federal government oversee and keep track of injury, illness in the workplace.
Yeah, it is. And speaking of injury, illness in the workplace, mental health conditions, we're going to increasingly be hearing more and more about that. Obviously, in light of some of the events going on right now around the country, what we think that we're going to increasingly see is the Department of Labor and the administration wanting to have the conversation about mental health. What they've done is they've literally updated and posted the FAQ yesterday, May 25th. And so we were able to include that latest information here. But we urge from the HR standpoint and from a policy standpoint to have it take a look and see what you might have in your employee handbook or in some type of coverage with regards to mental health conditions. The FAQ is pretty detailed. They've got about 6 different areas where they go in, and I'll show you on the next slide, where they go into FAQs and they give examples of what an employee might be doing and all that. But again, here, what they're talking about, mental and physical health conditions are considered serious health conditions under the FMLA if they require inpatient care or continuing treatment by a healthcare provider, such as an overnight stay in a treatment center. And that's where you can kind of see how this could potentially impact a handful of employees in a number of shops around the country. So we wanted to flag this as it may not have gotten typical attention as some of the other FMLA issues for shops that have 50 or more employees. The FAQ, as you can see here, we combined both the fact sheet and the FAQ in here. You'll see how they'll do the category about the individual employee. If you go to that page, you'll see that they'll then go into circumstances involving adult children, young children, others, the family, that kind of thing, so you can read through. But may I use the FMLA leave when I'm unable to work because of severe anxiety? I see a physician monthly for this condition to manage my symptoms. Yes, assuming that you work for a covered employer and are eligible for FMLA leave. So that's something, again, we just want to put on your radar screen. Again, an eligible employee may take up to 12 work weeks of leave for their own serious health condition that makes the employee unable to perform their essential job duties. And so if this hasn't been on your radar screen as much, we recommend just taking some time. It's not very dense, it's pretty straightforward to read, and just want to put that on your radar screen. Sticking with the Department of Labor, John.
Well, I want to point out, I mean, if your employer is being treated by a physician, but by a healthcare provider, rheumatoid arthritis and anxiety are symptoms that would fall under the FMLA. And so I'm not sure employers are aware, about that. And so make sure you go back and look at your employee manuals so that make sure that they are up to date.
Yeah. I'll just stick with the Department of Labor, Don, on unions as well.
Yeah, in April, the General Counsel of the NLRB came out with a determination that they're basically going to roll back 50 years of labor law to make it, their goal is to avoid employers from interfering in bargaining negotiations. We started seeing this earlier this year, when we were talking about the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better. In that Build Back Better, there was a number of labor provisions taking the country backwards. They were not successful in that. And so, as the saying goes in Washington, if you can't legislate it, then regulate it. And so after Build Back Better failed or wasn't able to pass, the General Counsel came up with some determinations that would, in 5 specific areas, that would impact the employer-employee relationship to prevent employers from interfering, determine how they would talk to their employees, or they can't talk to their employees about how the workplace environment will change if the facility becomes organized, and a whole number of examples out there put forth by the General Counsel. So we will be monitoring this moving forward.
Yep, and speaking of workers, shifting gears a little bit from regulating the workspace, Paul, I know we've gotten a lot of questions from folks starting last year, and how can they help some of the Afghan refugees and now Ukrainian refugees?
Yeah, as Omar, we sure have, and I know a lot of our folks who have joined us today, manufacturers, really want to figure out not only how they can help Ukrainians, but also, as we have seen from other countries, that a lot of our members, or several of our members, employ refugees and immigrants, and have had great results. It's a win-win for everybody. They're great workers and very dedicated, and I know that NTMA and PMA members really want to try to help when they can. The U.S. government has been a little slower. They've been criticized for being a little slow on what they're going to do about the Ukrainians who want to come to the U.S. and who get to the U.S. So, but DHS is getting their act together. As you can see here, they have what they're calling the Uniting for Ukraine program. It's a pathway to get Ukrainians to come to the U.S. for up to 2 years. You have to have somebody in the country provide financial support, and once they're in the U.S., they can apply for work authorization. We have some links here, so I encourage you to check it out. There's still a lot of things that need to happen, but while it's been a little slower than I think a lot of our members and a lot of folks in the workforce would like to see, it does seem that the U.S. is getting its act together on how we can get refugees who want to work and who want to work in manufacturing connected with employers. So we'll keep you posted on that. And Omar and I have fielded some questions, and there's not a lot that can be done until the federal government takes the lead on this. Thanks, Omar.
Yeah, well, let's stick with international stuff a little bit. And John, we now are coming up on 4 years since former President Trump put in the 201 tariffs that took effect July 6, 2018.
It is hard to believe it's been 4 years. And under the U.S. Trade Act, 301 tariffs are set to expire after 4 years. And so it has been 4 years. And so without proactive action by the USTR, that these tariffs are set to expire. And what the trade representative is doing is they're doing a review of necessity. Essentially, they're taking their proactive action to determine whether these tariffs, each individual tariff should stay or should be removed. There's a timetable for list 1, list 2, 3, and 4, because there's 4 different lists. We do expect that many of these tariffs will remain in place. If there is going to be a change, we see likely lifting of some consumer products. But there's a split within the administration. You've got Secretary of Treasury Yellen, who is urging the administration to lift some of the 301 China tariffs to ease the inflationary pressures that these tariffs would provide. Where you've got USTR, trade rep Tai, who says, no, we need to keep these tariffs to provide leverage to China to get something out from China to improve the trade relationship. And so that is the battle that's going on. In the meantime, the USTR is going to be examining specifically the tariff rates on list 1 and 2 in the near future. But there's also, it's a two-step approach, Omar.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is a 2-step process, and here you'll see the first step in the process. What they have to do is they put out an official notice, which they did a couple of weeks ago, saying to the public stakeholders, you still support the 301 tariffs, and if so, comment. This comment portal is right now is open to those who support individual tariff lines on specific items coming from China. They'll be commenting between May 7th and July 5th on list 1, which is a number of goods that are out there, industrial product primarily. List 2, those are also due in June 24th to August 22nd. List 3 and 4A can fall on either 1 or 2. You can comment in either period because both of those were really extensions of list 1 and 2 when they went into effect later on in 2018 and then 2019 for list 4A. What we're also looking at is USTR is going to continue to keep in place the tariffs. There's been a lot of misinformation coming out, including from Chinese suppliers. We saw one trying to sell some tooling and some molds into the US saying that Biden has already lifted, and clicking to an article that was, as we told this member company, fake news. So the tariffs are still in place. They will remain in place throughout the time that they do review. And to John's point, it is a 2-step process. But for those that are going to be commenting or want to know what it looks like, it's really only 2 pages. It's about 18 questions or so. Maybe not even that. You'll put in your comment, your first name, and the issue, your HTS line of the product, and that information. And what that will do, it'll go and tell USTR that yes, there is interest in continuation of these tariffs. If so, which we expect them to receive that interest, then they'll go ahead and move forward with a full stage review where people that both support and oppose the 301 tariffs on China can have an opportunity to file their comments. And right now they'll do that, we expect in the fall most likely. It'll be full open to the public to comment on the effectiveness and on specific tariff lines and whether or not you want to keep them. But I think, John, you're exactly right. They're likely to remove some consumer products for tariffs. They could also add some more under a new tariff action. They could also raise or lower them. We'll see how that goes. But it's getting a lot of attention up on Capitol Hill, especially with the supply chain bill.
Yes, we've been talking about the China supply chain bill for many weeks, many months now. And in traditional congressional action, they missed another deadline. The House and the Senate, they have a China bill at a conference committee. 108 members of the House and Senate serve on this conference committee, and the leadership had arbitrarily set a date of May 26, which is today, where the committee would basically set the parameters for a discussion to how to resolve the differences between the House passed bill and the Senate passed bill. Well, today's May 26, and they have not come to an agreement. Before Senator Young from Indiana left town earlier this week, he blasted the House Democrats on the conference committee for basically not negotiating good faith in this China competition bill. We have always said that this is going to be a long haul, but this is also a priority for both sides, House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats. And it's $52 billion for semiconductor chips. There's a number of good workforce development things in this bill. So I don't, does it get, originally when the Senate passed it last August, we thought maybe it might be done by Memorial Day. Clearly, it's not going to be done by Memorial Day. Maybe by the August recess, something may get accomplished, but they still have a long way to go.
Yeah, I agree with you, John, but there's still a pretty good chance that they do get it by August. They are going back and forth on some of the issues in the trade section. That title still has some challenges there. We've been emailing staff since last night, and Chair Brown this morning wrote back to us on it as well. So it's going to be a fight that goes there. There's some significant items. You're right. They're going to blow past the deadlines. Eventually, I do think they'll get somewhere on it. There's still some back and forth on the supply chain resiliency title as well. Some of our focus in here is trying to get a couple of things done. Obviously, some changes to the trade section that we're looking on. We think it's a little bit too generous to imports coming from China in some of the areas. We also want to see some STEM additions, especially when we're looking at the Jobs Act, which allows for Pell Grants for short-term training programs, and also the College Transparency Act to help borrowers better understand what they're getting into and the career opportunities that are available in advanced manufacturing. So that's what you see right here. This is an action alert that's currently up. You can use your support, reinforcing our message up here on Capitol Hill. John and I got a few weeks, hopefully, to get this thing done and wrapped before the end of the summer. And we're trying to make sure we get our job training provisions that are in there. But Paul, we're starting to see, we just talked about the U.S. Trade Representative and their review of Section 301 tariffs. We have a long history over at the U.S. International Trade Commission, and they've got their own review.
Yeah, as those on this webinar, a lot of you will remember back in the 2002 for the Section 201 steel tariffs that the Bush administration imposed on imported steel. The U.S. ITC played an important role because under the Section 201, the steel tariffs were 3-year tariffs, and halfway through, the ITC had to issue a report both on the impact on the domestic steel industry and the impact on steel users. Now we're dealing with a different section of U.S. trade law, Section 232, which is somewhat worse for those who are opposed to the steel tariffs because, number one, there is no end date for Section 232 tariffs. And number two, the U.S. ITC really didn't have a role. It was run by the Commerce Department and the White House. But under legislation, I believe, and Omar, you'll correct me, that was passed a little while ago. The Congress has directed U.S. ITC to hold these hearings on the impact of both Section 232 and 301 tariffs on the economy, which provide a opportunity for those for us and other steel and aluminum users to have some input and to provide some information to the U.S. ITC. This proved a critical moment back 20 years ago during the 201s, in that we used that U.S. ITC report, which they tried to bury the negative impact it had on steel and aluminum users, but it was one of the things that created momentum to end those tariffs 18 months early as a result of the report, because the report showed the damage that those tariffs were being done. So we're hoping to use this opportunity. As you can see, there's a timeline there. We have until July 6th to request to appear at the hearing, and then they're also going to have, and then the public hearing will be towards the end of July. There's also written comments. So through our Coalition of American Metal Manufacturers and Users, we will probably be recruiting some folks to both testify and also to get your input as we create these comments. So it's an important opportunity. Obviously, on the other side, there for the 301, that it's an important to also have comments regarding the need to keep some 301 tariffs on some products. And so it's really, I think, the most significant thing that has happened for the 232 tariffs since their implementation, and gives us an opportunity really to raise our voice. So we will keep you apprised of that opportunity.
Yeah, I think you're right there. This is exactly 20 years later, and the reason this was important that what got done in legislation is under the Section 232, there isn't a review process. It's open-ended, meaning the government can take this action on our allies and just keep it on and not having any kind of review. And you see how it went across administrations. So that's why we think this is important. And you can see, even though there's some relief coming on the aluminum markets here, and you can take a look at the silver, the gray on the top, that's just always assume if the number is the highest, that's the US price when it comes to metals, even though we're starting to see some softening here on aluminum and some in the copper markets and the red metals as well. We're still, as you can see here, on steel well above where we probably need to be on here. And I know the folks over at Bracewell have been making this point quite clearly to folks on Capitol Hill. We need to keep our focus on the real challenges we have with China, and rather than having the government continue to interfere in the metals market here domestically and internationally, because as you can see, we do have, and this is easier, you can always take a look at these later, we've got them for plate and for different kind of materials, and you will know that you can see where the pricings are. We're starting to still see some softening, but again, it's when we have to look at what your competitors in China are paying and what your counterparts in Europe are paying, we still are a competitive disadvantage right now.
Omar was not well labeled. I did highlight on the yellow highlight is back in October, the price difference between the US and China was 1,305 for hot rolled and 943 between the price difference between the US and Europe. And then it got cut off. But you know, the price difference between the US and China has gone down. It's $912, and for the price difference between the U.S. and Europe is 406. But I think the most interesting thing is on the last the last column on the right. We have been tracking this. This is the domestic utilization rate, what the steel industry itself is reporting through its trade association, and they update this on I think it's on a bi-weekly basis. As those of you who have been following Section 232 tariffs may recall, the stated goal by the White House and the Commerce Department back when they were implemented in 2018 was for the domestic industries, domestic steel producers to have a capacity utilization rate of at least 80%. When the steel tariffs were introduced, they were the domestic industry was at about in the low 70s. Very quickly they climbed above 80%, you know, within about 6 months, and since September of 2018, I think they have hovered between 79 and 85%. It's cut off there, but right now they're at 82%, which we are constantly reminding the Commerce Department and the White House that the stated goals of the Section 232 tariffs, at least for steel, have been achieved, and they should declare victory and remove them. But as Omar had warned since day one, is that, you know, once you have tariffs that don't have an end date, it's, you know, very hard. People get used to the protection, and it's very hard to get them removed.
Yeah.
As part of the efforts to remind folks about the supply chain challenges and the tariffs, the Biden administration did provide 1-year relief on tariffs, including steel tariffs on Ukraine. So they suspended, this was following the EU did the same thing on all tariffs and also on anti-dumping duties. The Europeans did, the US did not, but the US suspended steel tariffs as part of an overall 1-year suspension of tariffs on Ukraine. Not that the Ukrainians right now are exporting a lot of steel, but it was more symbolic. You want to talk about the?
Sure. So this is you know, in these webinars, we always like to include a little information on media outreach that we've done recently. You see here PMA's monthly business conditions report press release. This, for folks who are not familiar, although I'm sure everyone is the monthly report that really PMA is known for, and it's a true resource to journalists. It's always picked up in local and trade press in particular as an indicator of where the industry is and what folks can expect. So that's just a screenshot of that. And then if you are not familiar, the National Robotics League, a program of NTMA, hosted its championship competition over the weekend. This is a competition of robotics teams from all across the country who have qualified for the championship matches through regional competition. So it's really the best of the best. They had a number of teams from all across the country. This is a photo from the competition. These are middle and high school teams for the most part. So a great story, something that gets coverage every year. We work with them to put out their press release both before the event and after, and then usually get some favorable coverage in local press like this year. So you know, great story, not only for the students who are involved, but of course we use it to pivot to talk about the future of the industry and the importance of exposing young people and developing that pipeline of a skilled workforce for the future. So those are the two things to bring to your attention on the media side. If you like this content, you can hear more of it. We've got a podcast we record bi-weekly and post online. It's called Talking with One Voice. It's the four of us here that you hear on the webinar. It's similar to the webinar, but more in depth, and we do a little more politics. So for folks who are interested in that, you can find it on any podcast platform. Apple, Google Play, wherever you get podcasts. So do look that up, subscribe, then you'll get all the new episodes pushed directly to your phone. If you're already listening, you can rate or review the show. That helps other people find it. So that is the update on the podcast.
Yep, and John, for folks that want to continue to support us in activity efforts.
Yes, and thank you. Many of who are on this webinar have already contributed. So for those who have, thank you. For those who have not and want to see this content continue, please be generous and consider contributing to PMA's Advocacy Fund or NTMA's Government Affairs Administrative Fund, their GAF fund. This is a corporate contribution that you can do, and it helps underwrite some of the costs that we have in making sure this content continues. So thank you for those who have contributed, and thank you in advance for those who are about to contribute.
Yeah, we just passed the 30-minute mark. We try to keep these to about 30, 35 minutes. Any questions, please feel free to type them into the corner here. Hope you found this helpful. We'll give you another update, and we'll do this again next month towards the end of June. If you need anything in the interim, please reach out to Bill Padnos at NTMA or Christy Carmagiano at PMA or anyone that's listed up here on the screen. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your holiday weekend and be safe. Thank you.